Hi there. My psychologist is forever talking about motivation as being the key to recovery. So, as well as being an advocate for cognitive behavior therapy, she's also a great motivationalist, if there's such a word. Um, if you want to stop smoking or drinking or stop any kind of pattern of thought or behavior, you've got to be motivated to do so. And that's kind of something which happens, which only you can obviously achieve. You have to motivate yourself. No one else can motivate you. Um, well, that's certainly one side of it. I mean, when you look at motivation, there's only really two kinds. That's negative motivation and positive motivation. Um, so, you can imagine that you're in a field, and there's a gate. You're going to go over that gate if there's a ball in the field. So obviously that's a motivator for survival. And they call it negative because you're running away from the ball and over the gate. You see, so it's a sort of force of repulsion that propels you over the gate because you don't want to be gored to death. And certainly, unless you are looking at death, and certainly unless you really, really know that you're going to die if you don't stop drinking, or you're really in the gutter looking up at the stars, or you're really, really on basically you have no money left at all because you've gambled it all away, then that is going to be a pretty big motivator to get you to stop your behaviour or your patterns of thought. And but that's a negative motivator. On the positive side, you're going to try and jump the gate to impress a girl or a boy, and so basically he or she is your bow, to put it in old language. So it's either bulls or bows, right? And the bow is like you're going to want to impress somebody or impress your peer group, so you're going to go over that obstacle. And that's really great. And if the obstacle is too big, you're going to find something which will make you, which a box or something which you can stand on in order to get over the gate or the wall or whatever. So, of course, necessity is the mother of invention. But again, the reason why you would invent something to get yourself over a challenge or over an obstacle would either be to avoid something or to go towards something. And this is the basic algorithm of life. We're either going from something or we're going towards something that we want. We're either going towards the light or we're trying to get away from something which could harm us, a harmful heat or something like that. But in this world, the demiurge, there could come a time when either there are so many obstacles in your way, and either the obstacle is just so big that you can't find any way over it, or you just simply run out of resources, emotional, financial, physical, energetical resources, and you just can't even invent a way over the obstacle. And the obstacles just, at any rate, get bigger and bigger because this is what the world really ultimately amounts to, a whole bunch of obstacles which you then either cannot get over or you don't have the energy to get you over them. And then it doesn't matter what motivation you've got, either negative or positive, you're just not going to do it. So there is a limit to motivationalism. There is a sort of common sense physical limit to how much you can rely on motivation to bring change into your life. Although she does have quite a very, very interesting exercise which you might do at home. If you're fed up with your life and you're looking to change it, you ought to make two columns. One column is all the pros associated with your life as it's presently constituted. or even your patterns of thoughts as they are presently constituted, and a list of cons. And if the pros if there are more pros than there are cons, you're just not going to be motivated to change, because really you're not going to go outside your comfort zone. If there's no reason to go outside your comfort zone, if there's no reason to initiate change, you're just not going to do it. On the other hand, if there are more cons to pros, then you're going to say to yourself, well, why am I in this situation? Or why do I have these patterns of behaviors and thoughts? I got to do something about it, and there, right there, is your motivation, because you just look at the number of cons to pros and you think, well, change is got to happen. It's got to happen because it can't go on like this. So either way, by making this list of pros and cons to your behavior set, or to your cognitions, or to your emotions, or to your patterns of thought, or to your life situation, by making this list, you actually, in a way, either the list will show you that you are demotivated at heart to create change, or you are absolutely right to make a change, and right there is the source of your motivation. And you want to make change for positive reasons, to increase the number of pros in your life and to reduce the number of cons in your life. So right there is motivation enough to do it. But as I said before, all this assumes that change can be made, and assumes that challenges and obstacles really can be overcome, even with the help of invention or adaptation. Even that will not do it. And then, of course, I suppose ultimately acceptance is the answer, to accept what you really, really cannot change. And that's certainly one thing. But when you think about Gnosticism, it's almost like you draw a whole big circle. You draw a big circle round this whole sphere of challenges and obstacles, and the necessity for invention, and positive and negative motivators, and pros and cons, and lists and tricks of the mind, and discussions about motivation and the morality of motivation, and the morality of adaptation rather than non-adaptation, etc. And you draw a big line across it, and you say, you know what, I'm going to go to a place where motivation doesn't come into it, where necessity doesn't come into it, where invention doesn't come into it, where you're not running from something, or running towards something. You just, it's a sphere, it's a dimension where these things really, really don't apply, and don't even really have much. Well, you may know about them, but you don't have to apply any of it, because it doesn't require application. Okay. Now, that is not to say that I'm recommending suicide, for example, to get out of all this. Although that could depend, of course, on the degree of challenges, and such as unbearable pain and terminal illness, then that might be a different thing. I'm not recommending ordinarily a suicide. But what I'm just saying is that there's this intellectual, it's the thought, basically, that it doesn't have to be like this. That motivation is all very well and good, but you can sit and meditate on the fact that it's going to change, you're going to move into a dimension where motivation and demotivation and the dualism will not apply. And this thought experiment, as it were, will give you an enormous amount of comfort and hope, an enormous amount of clarity. It's like as if you're stepping away from the problem and looking at it from the perspective of the ineffable realm of the true God. You're sort of looking back, looking down, and one thinks of Wilfred Owen's poem about when he was looking down on the trenches, he was flying over the trenches of the First World War, and seeing people crawling around like caterpillars below him. And you're seeing it from a different perspective by carrying out this thought, experiment where you walk out of the room basically, and you don't care whether the elephant's in the room or not. You don't care whether you're motivated or demotivated. You don't really care about any of it anymore. You can just with your existing consciousness, never mind any future consciousness or future existential state, with your present existential state, your present consciousness, you can just walk out of this room. You can project your imagination out completely. But it's not exactly like fantasy, because fantasy is a sort of fantasizing, is a sort of uncontrolled urge to escape. This isn't escapism exactly. This is just the cold, intellectual, non-emotional recognition of the fact that existence doesn't have to be like this. That you don't have to be motivated, or you don't have to be challenged. And if the obstacles are too great, you don't have to find some way of overcoming them. You don't have to adapt. And this thought itself frees you from all this motivational stuff. And I have to say, with regard to CBT, that's cognitive behavior therapy, and different types of behaviorism, and pharmaceutical drugs, and the whole business of mind versus brain neurological activity, and how that can be just regulated through pharmaceutical drugs, which it certainly can, and certainly does, with lots and lots of people find this. You're still left with so many questions, and I don't feel that the psychologist, well-meaning as she is, can possibly provide me with any of the answers, because she doesn't actually provide me with any of the questions. All she does really is make me question my motivation and my level of motivation. But there is there's nothing beyond that, nothing beyond the human will. And you may say, well, there is nothing beyond the human will. And if anything, if you get to the point where something is beyond your will to change, then you will die, basically. And that's possibly the meaning of death, is to be faced with a set of challenges or obstacles which your will cannot get you over, or your will cannot overcome. And that then is a sign of impending death. And you don't want that if you're not actually about to die. So whilst you're still breathing, you are exerting your will, and your will to power, and your will to adapt, and your will to create inventions out of necessity, and your will to perceive a different path for yourself, by considering what motivation you do actually have. And this motivation, of course, may be sunk beneath a lot of depression, and you might need antidepressants in order to sort of strip away the layer of neurological depression, in order for you to see that it is possible to change by re-examining what motivates you, and changing your motivators, if you like. But it's still this, as far as it's good as far as it goes, but it's not going very far into the infinite. It's still very much bound to this material world. And again, a lot of people say, well, there's nothing else to be bound to, actually. There is only the material world. So, there is only your will, the material upon which your will exerts its influence, and the universe within which your will and material objects and energies operate. And if that's your view, well, then that's your view. But that seems to me to throw up a whole load of questions, which I'm not going to go into here. And these questions seem to me to have Well, unless you ask the questions, you're not going to get the answers, right? So I think my psychologist, as I said, well-meaning as she is, it isn't really what I'm looking for. I'm not just looking for changing patterns of thought and behavior. I'm really asking the question, why bother? Why do all this changing? Wouldn't it be better just to carry out a thought experiment in which further change really isn't called for, and the exertion of will isn't needed anymore, because I can propel my consciousness from this world where all this stuff happens to a world where all this stuff doesn't happen, and to a world where the duality of action and non-action don't exist. Seeing as I'm a curious person, my consciousness is never happy just to stay in the material, in the mud of this material world. It's going to always want to go forward to some place else, and that's the nomadic side of me, I suppose, coming out. So anyway, I don't know whether you're of the same sort of mental, whether you have the same mental curiosity as I do, and if you do, this presentation will strike a chord, and if you don't, it will just be gobbledygook, I suppose, really. So gobbledygook or not, here I stand. I can do no other.